Hey everyone, I'm in India right now, so I won't be a part of the discussion in this episode, but I'd like to give y'all an overview of today's topics before I hand the episode off to your hosts, Greg, Austin, and Virgil. Today's episode will cover the vast natural resources of the Congo, their influence on the Belgian Congo's development, the Congolese economy post independence, and the outsized influence this relatively weak economic power has had on the rest of the world. The Congo is home to some of the most precious and rare mineral resources on our planet, containing massive concentrations of raw materials that are nothing short of world wonders. The Congo is the world's undisputed source for many of the resources that fuel the technology we use on a daily basis, as well as the technology that we hope to build a greener, renewable future with. Currently, these resources are extracted from the Congo using slave labor, brutal suppression of human rights, and bloodshed. The naturally rich Congo has a long history of violent Western intervention carried out in the name of cheap resource extraction and one-sided deals. More often than not, this history is not recorded by Western observers, or even outright hidden by Western observers. The price of this massive human suffering and permanent environmental destruction in the Congo has been paid unwillingly in order to carry out even more horrific human rights violations around the globe. Learning the history of the Congo is not only necessary to understand the past, but crucial to our future and the fate of humanity as a whole.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Congo Colonization and Conservation, a subseries of Guerrilla Radio Show. This is part 3, Going Nuclear. As always, before each episode in this series, we'd like to remind all of our listeners that topics of a triggering nature, including violence, sexual assault, torture, and/or other forms of abuse, may be present in our conversation. Please feel free to skip ahead when we speak on these topics if you feel the need to do so. We would also like to remind y'all that we are absolutely open to critical commentary, fact checking, and dialogue on the topics we discuss should we get something wrong. Feel free to DM us on any platform we're on if you have any information that would help make the show better. That's all for now. Let's get into the episode.
Hey everyone, Austin here. Let's begin with some important background anthropological and resource wealth information on the Congo so that you guys at home have some context for what we're talking about today. The Congo Basin has been inhabited by modern humans for over 50,000 years and provides food, fresh water, and shelter to more than 75 million people today. Nearly 150 distinct ethnic groups exist here, with the region's Baaka people among the most notable representatives of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. The lives of the Baaka are intimately linked with the forests of the basin. A statement I'd like to clarify real quick by saying that agrarian societies often think of themselves as not being reliant on nature, or not as reliant on nature as hunter-gatherer societies are, and often deride this lifestyle as primitive, uh, or the concept of being reliant on nature, deriding that as primitive. This leads to much of the present discourse surrounding conservation, especially those of great apes and other primates in Africa. Simply put, most people do not see what good saving gorillas would do in an increasingly industrialized, economically driven world. For the sake of the overarching point that I'm making here, I'll spare you the details of why primates are ecologically significant for right now, and just say that they are somewhat of a load-bearing species. If the bare conditions required for their survival are not met, the rest of the natural environment surrounding them are likely not having their needs met either. The question of why we should care about preserving the natural resources of the Congo is a ridiculous one, as it supposes that only quote unquote primitive hunter gatherers and local wildlife are truly reliant on the Congo's natural bounty. This goes much further than trees being an important carbon sink. Now more than ever, the world is kept functioning because of the resources presently being extracted from the Congo.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the agrarian society, like hunter gatherer dichotomy, because something that I learned not too long ago, and I have to look up the name of the book that I was reading this in, but there is a direct connection between the industrialization of agrarian societies, because the point of an agrarian society is to produce and maintain crops in a farmland that stays in place versus hunter gatherer societies that are providing for themselves without really being able to carry things with them in the same way because their resources aren't staying in one place. And so agrarian societies kind of naturally industrialize over time because less and less of the population needs to be involved in that production work. And so as those societies are trying to industrialize, they find ways to cut the costs of labor, both like in terms of physical work and also the like actual cost. And so there often ends up being a like a period of time in a lot of agrarian societies where they are like slaveholding societies, which is not something that is very common in hunter gatherer ones. Um,
Yeah.
and I like find that like I guess obscuring of labor, because that is what's like slavery is it's allowing other people in society to not actually do work. um a really interesting way of like being like, oh, we're not a part of nature, but it's like you've just like put that out of sight. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that because obviously, like when you say agrarian society, you're thinking, well, yeah, they're obviously reliant on nature too, as in like, oh, they need rain, they need good soil, but agrarian society includes cosmopolitan society, like cities and stuff, where you're not going to see farms in a city, so it's sort of out of sight, out of mind, considered not really necessary to the survival of the society, even though it's completely backed, held up at the foundations by nature, farming
Yeah.
or otherwise.
Well, and when you think about like the trajectory of the United States, where 200 years ago it was like an agrarian society that was industrializing, and so when the United States was engaging in chattel slavery, like the site of that production was primarily in the South, but the people in the North like benefited from the cheap and free labor of slavery, regardless of if they were participating in it. And as economic globalization is like has kind of just reached a point where there's not a part of the world that is not like touched by Western capitalism. The like outsourcing of that labor and the like site of agrarian production is now all the way in like parts of the global South. And so it's like what Greg was talking about, where the like tech resources that are used to create are like phones and computers and stuff that's being produced in another place. And so it's not really that different from like how things were in the United States and in Europe like 200 years ago, where the site of production was like somewhat closer to home, but still like being through the exploitation of other people, and the obscuring of labor there. And I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, no, like we'll get into it more, of course, but like you said, with the materials used to build cell phones, computers, that's cobalt and lithium and stuff. That's almost without exception. That's pretty much all being extracted from the Congo. Not exclusively from the Congo, but the Congo is
Yeah,
typically
that
the
was actually what I was about to say next, is that the
yeah.
Congo Basin, it's extremely rich in wood and oil, which are two very valued resources, as well as other resources that are mined, like diamonds, gold, copper, tin, coltan. That like coltan is the element made to create cell phones, and the DRC is responsible for 65% of global cobalt production. And the Congo is also uniquely gifted in, or one other natural resource, uranium. And there's like, I think another like interesting political connection here too, because if people know about the history of like South African apartheid, like South Africa is very like gold rich, and the like connection there and the investment in the United States in like supporting and continuing apartheid allowed them to continue exploiting those resources. And I think that you can see the same pattern playing out in other African countries that are rich in resources that Western capitalists need. And usually, when you hear people from one of these countries talking about how they'd like to nationalize those resources, that's right about when you'll like start seeing stuff in the news about the human rights issues that are happening in
Yeah.
that country or something. Like
Yeah.
we really need U.S. intervention all of a sudden. But the DRC is one of the world's richest nations in terms of mineral wealth, with up to 24 trillion US dollars in untapped mineral deposits. Mining and extractive industries like oil make up over 95% of the Congolese exports every year. However, much of this money is unseen by regular Congolese people, which will maybe come as a huge surprise to the baby brained listeners of Guerrilla Radio Show. I don't know. Um,
Learning a lot today.
Our little pea brains.
but okay, so a lot of this like wealth that the DRC has is for some reason unseen by regular Congolese people, like take the petrostates of the Persian Gulf. These states reap the rich rewards of the oil industry, and for the most part, with some notable exceptions, invest the money from oil into their own development as future proof for when the oil eventually runs out. And this can mean many things like road networks, transit infrastructure, development of domestic consumer driven economies, economic negotiating blocs to boost their clout on the world stage. These nations also heavily invest in alternative industrial outputs that are not possible without heavy investment and set up costs subsidized by the current oil industry. This doesn't happen in the Congo. The majority of the mining is owned, operated, and controlled by foreign multinational conglomerates who extract the resources with cheap local labor and take the profits home. And I think for people that don't know, like when people are talking about economic globalization, as long as they're not doing the like anti-Semitic dog signaling, because I think that that's also how globalism gets used now too. But if they're being
Yeah.
smart about
Yeah.
it, this is what that means. It's like people in one location are extracting resources from people in another and using those resources to generate more capital where they are without investing that back into the local economy of the place that they have extracted resources and labor from.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ruin everybody's dream of European socialism real quick.
Oh
So
no,
this is a
is it
great
it's
time to
bad there?
remind everyone at home. This is a great time to remind everybody at home that the wonderland that Europe appears to be to people who visit is built entirely on the blood of Africa. Every single
And
fun,
Latin America.
fancy Western, yeah, and Latin America. So most European countries didn't really give up their colonies in Africa. They added a new layer of bureaucracy to look good on the world stage and basically retain all economic control. So here's a great example because we hate the French. So France in Africa today, currently, both directly and indirectly controls about 5.2 million square miles outside of Europe. That's 5.2 million square miles of land in Africa, Latin America, and the Pacific Islands. The majority of this is in Africa, though. This is home to about 167 million people, which is 3 times the population of France itself. The United Kingdom holds sway over tens of millions of people in Eastern Africa. Italy still has influence in the Horn of Africa, and the Belgians, obviously, still have an insane amount of sway over the Congo. So when we start looking at Europe through this lens, profiteering and stripping the entire continent to their south, it's pretty easy to see why Western Europe specifically is the way that it is. Without these resources that the West yanks out of Africa and the global South every year, France would look a lot more like Poland, a European country that doesn't have colonies and has to subsist on its own shit.
I am
That's why
so impressed.
Eastern Europe is so bleak to many people because the western part of the continent is so glamorous. It's not because they're better at anything. It just happens to be that your average pickpocket in Bucharest does not have the generational wealth that your average pickpocket in Paris has.
I
Um,
am
it's just the
I
way
am
things
so
are.
impressed by your ability to find a way to tie anything into being derogatory towards the Polish. Like it's just impressive no matter the topic. Like we can
No
always
matter the
find a
tone.
way to say something about them. I
Until we
think
get the
like
Polish People's Republic back, I will continue to
probably
shit on Poland every day.
most people listening would know now. I think it's pretty common knowledge that France made Haiti pay them back in reparations. I think something like $21 billion total, or like the
Yeah, we
equivalent
mentioned
of
this.
Insane.
$21 billion.
Enforced by the U.S., by the way.
Yeah, and I think that that is like the key to understanding like what Western hegemony is like these like Western nations like shoring up their power by protecting each other and then using that to amass more power and like extract more resources. Did you know that France said that they were going to pay it back, but then they were like, we meant we will pay back the moral debt.
That's an insane thing to
Oh,
say.
and what is the moral debt? $21 billion.
Yeah, they were like, we owe Haiti a debt and we will pay it back. And then the French official that said that, I think it was the prime minister at the time, like was then asked, like, are you going to pay it back? And he was like, oh, we meant, like, I meant in vibes. Like, we'll get.
They were just not in good
only the
feelings.
most valuable.
Yeah.
And they didn't finish paying them back until you guys would probably know, right? It's like 40, 47, 46.
I believe it was like right after World War II
So crazy.
that they finally paid it all back.
The
Which is,
audacity of French people. They took people as
Yeah.
slaves and they were like, hey, you guys kind of made this sick deal for us, like not such a sick deal anymore.
Yeah.
Well, there you go, folks. $21 billion seems to be the price of economic independence, and it only takes
Yeah.
150 years and multiple Western-backed coups.
Yeah.
This is why the Congo's poor. Like this is like that's it. That's your good answer for everybody at home who's like, why is the Congo so poor? It's because the West has the economic might and also the military might to kind of keep everybody they don't want to be rich poor forever.
Yeah, that is like the best case scenario in a lot of, like, I mean, just like looking at the facts of what have happened with other like African and colonized nations where people have tried to regain their independence, like they aren't even given the option of paying back a ton of money in order to keep their independence. Normally now we just send someone in there and take out that leader, and then we like do a publicity campaign about the dictator or whoever.
Yeah. This is just like Libya went from a country with a top 10 standard of living and the entire world to now being in the bottom 10 now.
Yeah, thinking about Libya makes me so sad.
It makes me so mad. It makes me so fucking mad.
So, back to the Congo. There are two main ways in which mining is carried out in the DRC. Large-scale industrial mining operations, which hopefully you're familiar with, at least conceptually. If you're not and want to picture what that looks like, Google Bingham Copper Mine, Utah for Greg, and look at the pictures.
It's fucking scary, folks. I can see it from my house.
That's what large-scale industrial mining looks like. So, the other way mining is carried out is called artisanal and small-scale mining, or ASM. ASM is mostly unregulated in the DRC, and while these mines should exist in designated zones, they rarely do and simply pop up wherever a mineral deposit is found. It is extremely common for children to be the main workforce in these mines, subjected to brutal treatment by overseers, who are more slave drivers than bosses, common theme this episode, made to work with hand tools to pull minerals out of the earth that at times can be extremely dangerous. Minerals such as lithium, cobalt, copper, and wolframite often exist in precarious formations liable to collapse, or can even be located in deposits surrounded by trace amounts of radioactive materials. These quote-unquote cooperatives often wind up funneling money back to European conglomerates via a series of shell corporations, which lend an air of legitimacy to the entire operation. Now, while the DRC's government has attempted to place more restrictions on the ASM industry, the massive land area and difficult navigation over many portions of the country lend an almost insurmountable difficulty of enforcement in the cash-strapped nation. So what are these minerals? Uranium, which we'll be discussing a lot this episode because it's very important, helped put Congolese mining on the map. The Shinkolobowe mine in the Katanga region of the DRC was the richest and most easily accessible uranium ore in the world for decades. The uranium mine in Katanga, in fact, fueled the Manhattan Project that led to the development of the nuclear bomb.
Not only did it fuel the American nuclear project, it also provided the uranium for the thankfully failed German nuclear weapons project in the 1940s.
Yeah.
Ugh. Cool. From 1940 to 1960, the United States received thousands upon thousands of tons of uranium from the Shinkolobowe mine. The uranium of Shinkolobowe was an unusually high quality, nearly 65% pure uranium ore, whereas the norm for a good vein is like around just 0.3%. Without the Shinkolobowe mine, the United States may have never been able to come up with enough uranium to develop nuclear weapons. Even though the US presence officially ended in 1960 after Congolese independence, although the uranium was still highly prized by the West, and access to the mine, as well as any and all governments in the Congo, was tightly controlled by the West to prevent the uranium from falling into the hands of the USSR. One of the very first examples of this US-backed interest was apparent in their meddling with the first president of the Congo, Patrice Lumumba. Lumumba made it clear he would not allow the West the same amount of freedom of action as the Belgians, which concerned the Americans, leading to the secession of the Katanga province 11 days after Congolese independence with Western backing. When Lumumba reached out to the USSR for help, this only worried American interests further, which may have contributed to the US government's backing of Lumumba's eventual assassination.
May have.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe.
it may
Possible.
have. I
You
had to
know,
put may have, folks, because nobody's confirmed or denied.
it's
Yeah.
unclear.
Unclear.
But we can draw our own conclusions based on some context clues and some evidence, maybe. Um, in an article from the BBC, historian Susan Williams at the UK Institute of Commonwealth Studies says attempts by the Congolese people to negotiate better conditions for themselves were attacked as communist fueled sedition. The idealism, hope, and vision of the Congolese for a Congo free of occupation by an external power was devastated by the military and political interests of Western powers. Eventually, from the 1960s to the 1990s, the mining slowed down, and eventually in 2004, after decades of accusations of the mines used by the Israeli nuclear project, numerous injuries, and over 15,000 miners and their families living at the edge of the open pit mine exposed to radiation, the mine was sealed off with concrete, and the local miners' village was completely dismantled by the Congolese military, though ASM mining may still occur at the site, but this is unknown.
So, folks, when I was doing research for the shutdown of this mine, you can find a video of the Congolese army dismantling the village, which is just them. They kicked everybody out, and they're all like standing in a crowd behind them, and then they just take tanks and they push everything like apart and into the pit.
Oh God.
A lot of the people who worked there were very sick all the time. They were getting radiation poisoning.
Yeah.
This is the purest uranium ore ever found on the surface. And they had children, families. It wasn't just miners there. And everybody, at least in the pit video I saw, everybody's wearing shorts and t-shirts. Nobody's wearing protective clothing to mine this stuff. And it is pretty much confirmed that South Africa and Israel worked together to get the uranium out of that mine for their respective nuclear weapons programs.
Yeah, and there's like a long history of like everyone who lived in the vicinity of that mine having terrible radiation poisoning. Like, obviously, like just beyond the fact that they're doing this mining without any sort of protection, but just the residual effects of that, just generations of medical problems, birth defects, and things of that nature. Yeah, in fact, I think Shinkolobwe is named after a type of boiled apple that will leave a burn if squeezed. So I I think definitely they knew that what they were doing is unhealthy, but the labor wasn't exactly voluntary. So, you know.
The land around the mine is also, think of a Chernobyl exclusion zone, but very poorly enforced. Like, nobody is supposed to be near that mine at all. You will die.
Yeah, I mean, and this like kind of thing like fits into a pattern that has been going on like really since the start of Western capitalism of like the extraction of resources from the global South, and in particular Africa, the theft of African labor. Like there's I think the lifespan, the average lifespan of an enslaved person who's working on like the sugar plantations was like 25. And so I think, you know, when people are talking about how there is modern day slavery, I mean, you have like child laborers, you have people who have no other option but to like work and then die of radiation related sicknesses. It's just not very different from what was happening 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And I mean, that's kind of why I'm excited about, it's not totally related, but the potential unionization efforts of the African AI workers. It's not quite on the same scale, but like there's a lot of mental trauma that comes from doing that work and like long days and low pay.
Yeah.
But I do feel like every time people in these colonized nations attempt to have any agency without really like a violent overthrow of the system. It doesn't. It's not successful for very long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty obvious how this stuff all ties into primatology and conservation, in that destroying the natural environment is obviously going to have an effect on gorilla populations, but there's more important things going on here, I guess. I think also another telling thing about this is like so much of the renewable energy that we're building like to save the environment ostensibly is also being harvested through environmental destruction and colonialism. Like, nuclear power is probably the most promising energy source that isn't polluting, but like considering the conditions that people are mining this uranium in, or the conditions just generally that impact the environment around them.
Well, to be fair, that this doesn't happen anymore, we think. We're pretty sure.
Well, yeah, but even still, if like everyone was paid fairly, like nobody in the Congo, I feel, is like willingly going and being like, I want to be a cobalt miner. If they were really truly getting the economic value of this stuff, the Congo would be indisputably the richest nation in the world, right? And if we're building our clean energy future on the backs of, this concept that these materials are going to be simple and easily accessible, I don't think that's possible it's not possible under capitalism in a world where exploitation isn't a factor.
Well, it's
So,
not just a
yeah.
factor, but is like a necessary component for the
Yeah.
system to continue functioning. I think Greg would
Hmm.
probably know more about the science behind this than I do, but I think that like economists have not been shy about expressing their opinion that even in the United States, like we need to have a certain level of unemployment for the US economy to function in the way that is like most beneficial to capitalist interests. And I think that if you can like kind of just extrapolate from there, that if here in the place of global power and where like most global capital is concentrated, there is still a necessity for people to be poor and destitute and unemployed, then what needs to be the case in places where the entire purpose of them to capitalists is just resource extraction? Like, of course, the people there are going to be in poverty because otherwise, the like system that has been put in place where we're taking resources from there and then capitalists are like turning it into something that generates more capital for them, that it just wouldn't
Yeah.
function.
You guys ever at home? Has anybody ever seen the original Incredibles movie? In the first 5 minutes,
Okay,
when
I'm listening.
Syndrome says, when everyone's super, then no one will be. That's kind of how actual economists look at capitalism. If everybody has enough money to survive, then everybody's actually poor. That's how they're thinking.
Yeah.
So to actually drive the economy forward, the way it's currently set up, there has to be gravity pulling money from one side to the other. That is generally pulling money from the poor towards the rich, which is why when unemployment goes too low, you see things freak out. Like when COVID started to end, big old air quotes, the economy started to lose its mind a little bit, because if everybody has a job, that's bad. The U.S. economy needs between 3 and 5% unemployment to function as normal, as the Federal Reserve would have it. So anyway, in a country where you're doing just resource extraction, you need about 40% of the country to be poor. And they need to
Yeah.
be in poverty for that resource extraction to still be profitable. Because if that entire country starts to gain personal wealth, they will expect wages to rise, which cuts into the profits of Western companies pulling that resource.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
it is. It's hard to coerce a person that is stable. Like when I was like in and out of living out of my car, I used to sell my plasma, which you should never do. Like
No, you
never sell it.
shouldn't.
You
I've
need
done it.
that. Like you need your plasma, do not sell it. I would like I think I would sell it for like $50 or something, and then I would
Yeah,
lie
get like a
because you're not
$50
supposed to
card
do
for it.
it very often because it's really bad for you. And so I would like go to different places and sell my plasma like several times within the space of a month. And as soon as I got my money up, I stopped doing that because it was terrible for me. It's terrible for your body. And so like when the like coercion, like the economic coercion element like isn't there, then people are able to demand better for themselves, and that would not really be in the best interests of capital. And I think that's why the thing that you said, Austin, about how it's like not quite as bad, or it's like not as bad like when we're just talking about the effect on gorillas. But I think that it's important because to like in the perspective of like maintaining Western like hegemonic power, the resources of actual environmental resources, animals, the labor of people, like it's all considered the same. And the goal is just to get as much value as possible out of those resources, but putting as little into it. And there's not really a consideration for like the value of a human life, let alone an animal life. And I
Yeah.
think that the thing that you were saying about like gorillas being what did you call them? They're like the canaries.
I mean, the
Load
term is,
bearing.
I call them load bearing, but they're technically, I think the term is usually an umbrella species, or there's another more specific term.
Keystone species.
Keystone species. Essentially, like, yeah, if gorillas are dying out or like extinct, that is not a good sign for the rest of the environment. Not just because gorillas do have a role in the ecosystem, but because if gorillas can't survive, it's not going to be habitable for many other animals either. But yeah, I guess
Yeah.
the way I want to like break this to anthropologists, like anybody with like an anthropology degree or like pursuing an anthropology degree listening to this, um,
Stop.
when well,
Stop what you're doing.
stop. No, but whatever, like your professors talk about, like the struggles of like figuring out conservation and like getting funding, just know that like I've wanted to scream this in every class I've ever been in. There's no good way to do conservation in countries that you're extracting from. They're never going to have enough
Yeah.
resources, because if they had the resources to do conservation, they wouldn't be getting raw materials extracted in another country in the first place. So
Well, people are part of the environment, and like
yeah.
if someone, or like if industries and other countries and capitalists are like treating the environment of a place as if it is disposable, then that is like indicative of what their attitude is towards the people that live there too. Like, how is the water in Flint, Michigan?
Yeah.
Like it got fucked up there. The people are drinking poison water now, and no one cares because the land there and the people living on it were considered disposable by people that wanted to make some money.
Yeah, there's a pretty direct correlation between how poor a country is in the last 100 years and their mineral wealth. The poorest countries on the planet are usually actually some of the richest, if they were allowed to exploit their own resources. Basically, all of sub-Saharan Africa is extremely rich in mineral wealth of different kinds, some sort of natural resource, power generation, one of these things, and yet sub-Saharan Africa all the way down until you get to South Africa itself are essentially some of the poorest countries on this planet. Which is fun. It's fun. We love global capitalism. It's awesome. It's great. It's working
It
really
is
well.
working. It's working
Yep.
great.
It's working fine. It's working fine. There are endless frontiers for capital to expand into forever and ever and ever, and we never have to
One
worry about
day-
the consequences.
I'm gonna be a millionaire, and you can too.
Yeah. We can all be millionaires.
Mhm.
So let's take a look at something else that's happening in the Congo. The palm oil industry. Now, while the regular old oil industry is well known in the Congo at this point, bear with us. I'm all right. Just note for everybody at home: Austin wrote this. The story of food giant Unilever should hopefully shed some light on the struggle for primate conservation around the globe. The information we're going to cover is taken from the World Rainforest Movement's article titled A Century of Agro-Colonialism in the Congo, as well as some direct excerpts from the book Lord Leverhulme's Ghosts by Jules Marchal. In 1911, King Leopold of Belgium, known bastard, remember that, granted massive concessions of land within what is now the DRC to the British industrialist and massive proponent of colonialism, William Lever. Remember that. Lever also known as Lord Leverhulme. What the fuck? Okay.
Europeans.
William Lever wanted a cheap source of vegetable oil for his company's leading brand of detergent called Sunlight. Palm oil, which had long been an important part of food systems in Central Africa, was increasingly valuable to European traders and industrialists who had at this point been regularly visiting communities along the Congo River to purchase palm nuts. This competition from other European traders was increasing local prices for the nuts, much to the disdain of Lever. This deal that Lever and King Leopold struck granted him 750,000 hectares of forested land, twice the size of Belgium, just so that we all know, filled with massive palm oil groves that the area's inhabitants had cultivated and developed over generations. When I say cultivated, I mean that the people of the Congo had literally, quote, converted what was once a savanna into the world's most important tropical forest.
Yeah, it's a little crazy how the people of the Congo did not just simply live among nature, but rather cultivated it responsibly for human benefit over thousands of years. Crazy how that works. But believe it or not, these concessions from Leopold did not initially grant Lever's company, Hilaire du Congo Belge, rights over the territories of local communities living within the area. There was actually supposed to be a process to carve out and demarcate the lands within the concessions, but Lever was, believe it or not, impatient and pushed the Belgian authorities to grant him a monopoly over the purchase of nuts in the area. These were known as the infamous tripartite agreements between Lever, the Belgian colonial authority, and the local communities, who in reality had no say over the matter. From then on, locals were treated as thieves if they dared to supply nuts harvested from their own palm groves to anyone other than Lever's company, even though the open market price was generally 3 to 4 times higher than that paid by Lever. Lever and the Belgians justified this monopoly to other European traders on the grounds that Lever's company was making significant investments in the area by building palm oil mills and providing the locals with jobs, schools, medical clinics, and churches. Does that sound familiar? This was not
Mm.
true in any meaningful sense of the word. The schools, if you could call them that, were not attended because the local children were all forced laborers for HCB. The hospitals, equally inaccessible to local people, did not prevent a nearly 10% mortality rate from daily company operations alone. Now, Lever and the Belgians also put forth the argument that palm groves were quote unquote natural and not, as we just said, the result of generations of care and work by local communities. They supposed that if the palm groves were a part of nature, the Belgian colonial authority could claim dominion over them and more easily justify handing control over them to the HCB. Which, if you're gonna just steal land, it seems weird to like try to justify it in that way, but
You gotta tell yourself something when you go home at the end of the day. Like, I don't know, like, what are Europeans telling themselves now?
That they are an enlightened people who love the world and are pacifists.
I feel like sometimes I might create the false impression on my listeners that I've only read like three things because I'm constantly citing the Californian ideology. But I am gonna do it again,
That's okay.
because the like example that is given in there about Thomas Jefferson and the dumbwaiter, which is that Thomas Jefferson, who famously loved owning slaves and doing terrible things with them, also he considered himself a bit of an innovator, much like some other people we know. And so one of his inventions was the dumbwaiter, which is like a device that you can ring a little bell, and then the elevator goes down and someone can put whatever it is that you wanted in there and it comes back up to you. And so this like tech invention doesn't really actually do anything but obscure the labor that goes into the person in power getting what it is that they want. And I feel like when we're thinking about, I guess, like agrarian societies becoming industrial societies, and then trying to like justify what is made by nature versus like what is like a technological invention, but then we see that there's a 10% mortality rate, which is that is crazy.
yeah.
Like that it's just like beyond I feel like comprehension. And so all of these like technological advances just obscure the work and also the destruction and pain that goes into creating these resources that generate wealth for people. And it like makes it also very easy to like when it's not something that you are like seeing and thinking about every day, it is easier for the people in the places who are like benefiting from this resource extraction but aren't maybe the ones that are doing it themselves to like not think about it too hard because they're not seeing it, which is like that is how it is for us here, where I think people know about the like Nestle, like everything that goes into producing chocolate, or like cobalt in our phones, or AI is another like great example of something that's like causing environmental destruction, but none of those things are things that we see like each time we like make use of those products. And we are like so obscured by like several layers of technology as well as like geographical distance from that like resource extraction, that it is easy to just think of it as a tech invention rather than like mass exploitation.
Yeah.
In a letter from 1925, a district commissioner from Bosoko wrote to the provincial governor about the labor situation at Leverhulme's operations. Quote, recruitment of workers for the HCB has been for many years so unpopular with the natives that the moral pressure exerted by the territorial administrators barely prevails. The whole of Arawini district is rich, and a worker gathering natural produce of the forest, palm nuts especially, may readily earn a living and create resources not available to him through labor in industry or trade. The only way to effect an easy transition between forced labor and free wage labor would be to pay the worker a wage that is at least equal to what he can earn without leaving his village or changing his habits. The only firm established in the district, the HCB, offers its workers a wage that in no way compensates them for their sacrifices. So before I read the next quote, I just want to just take a moment here, and this Belgian district commissioner in 1925, in at that time the core of colonial power, is giving a critique of capitalism. He just doesn't realize he's doing it.
They love
This is
doing
just a
that.
standard. Yeah, this is just a standard
Whoopsie.
critique of capitalism. That if you're not giving people, to each according to their ability, to each according to their need, bad shit happens. So we'll continue to the bad shit happening. Moreover, Lever and the Belgians actually did move forward with specifically carving out areas belonging to the company in 1928 for the express purpose of, quote, enclosing the local populations to their villages and no further. This is just the establishment of reservations in the very American sense. So think of it like that going forward. The natives will be forbidden to move their villages and their cultivated fields outside the boundaries assigned to them, and they will be forbidden to gather fruit from palms on our land without rendering themselves liable to, I believe this should say prosecution, not persecution, but either way. They should remain confined to their reservations. We shall not allow them to take palm fruit from palms growing on our own concessions in order to simply sell them to other traders. And if they engage in acts of violence against our workers or against our European agents, as they have threatened to do so, we shall invoke the protection from the state guaranteed to us by Article 18 of our convention. So this is the state gets to wield violence in defense of capitalism, standard shit. So, as you've probably guessed, along with literally everything else we've ever talked about in the Congo up till now, this was not a popular move among the Congolese people, and led
Huh.
to a lot of tension and occasional clashes between the natives and the HCB. This would all come to a head in the Pende Rebellion of 1931. The Pende people, living in the southwest of what is now the DRC, organized what was one of the biggest rebellions of the Belgian colonial occupation. It started in the Kwango district, in particular in the territories of Kikwit and Kandali, areas dominated by HCB's palm oil operations. The main reasons behind this rebellion was the brutal policy of the colonial administration in the area. What does that sound like, folks? Which, due to a lack of healthy and willing workforce for palm oil harvesting, sent soldiers to the villages to violently recruit workers. The mortality among those recruited was extremely high. For every 20 workers recruited to collect palm oil fruit in and around Lusanga, the center of HCB's palm oil operations in the region, hardly 10 would return to their villages. The economic crisis of the early 1930s further reduced wages of workers and led the colonial government to increase taxes, shifting the economic burden of the Great Depression off of the Belgian people and onto the Congolese people. An estimated 500 villagers were killed in clashes with the colonial army during the rebellion, and hundreds more perished in concentration camps where they would be imprisoned under brutal conditions.
Yep. So,
Everyone, up until the end of World War II, folks, every country that liked to claim it had good moral standing was doing a genocide somewhere.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Lever's company, HCB, would later morph into the multinational food giant Unilever, which you may recognize from the packaging of just about any soap product or even food that you've ever bought. You've seen Unilever in a grocery store before. Unilever's plantations and colonial-era land decrees survived the end of the Belgian colonial rule over the Congo in 1960, with the obvious foreign influence of Mobutu's post-Lumumba dictatorship. The Mobutu government even took minority ownership in the company and renamed it Plantations et Hullers du Congo, PHC, and continued to enforce the same outrageous land decrees that built Unilever in the first place. Since this rebrand, PHC has changed hands numerous times but still served the same exact economic interests, and remains the largest producer of palm oil in the Congo. This is to say nothing of what Unilever would go on to do to the rest of the world, setting up palm oil factories and suppliers in Indonesia and Borneo. If you've listened to our podcast before, or are at all familiar with the struggle for orangutan conservation, you will know how disastrous palm oil plantations have been to the environment in these countries. The Canadian company Feronia Incorporated bought PHC from Unilever in 2009 with backing from European and US quote-unquote development banks. And then the operations were handed over to a private equity firm based in the tax haven of Mauritius. Is that how you say it?
Mauritius.
You never want to get involved.
Mauritius, also.
Yeah.
Not good.
Backed this time by university endowments, philanthropic
What
giant.
universities?
I
I
can
bet you I can guess.
I can take a guess.
Harvard, War Crimes
Harvard,
University,
Stanford,
Yale, Stanford,
Yale, Brown.
Yeah, and by War
yeah.
Crimes
Oxford
University,
probably.
yeah.
Probably always Oxford. They've been doing evil shit since the 14th century.
But you know who has never, ever donated money to tax havens? Is the Evergreen State College
Evergreen
the only school that
Your
you can
TV
go
show
to,
sounding ass college.
and you'll never ever graduate and be in a position where you can do war crimes or evil. It's so it's the
Yeah.
only school that isn't a bastion of like terrible things in the West.
So obviously, this company has changed hands quite a few times. It's still Unilever, like it built Unilever and was a part of Unilever until it was bought out.
So it's like HBO Max, which is Max now.
Yeah.
It's just Max.
In each of these iterations, the company's owners and investors relied on the same set of manufactured colonial land documents to justify their occupation of over 100,000 hectares of land. That's right, they still didn't change it. They kept the same documents that we just read.
I mean, that's how things are here too. Because like, how do people own the land that they are on here if they are not like
That is true.
indigenous? Like,
yeah, I guess.
and there are people whose families have been here from the start that have owned the land that they're on. So it is like those are also like colonial documents,
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
putting it like how I just put it makes it sound outrageous, but then if you start to think about it in the context of the United States, you realize that's also outrageous. So do with that what you will.
Well, it's maybe it's all bad.
It's possible that it's all bad.
It's quite possible.
So today, the communities and workers within the PHC's claimed land remain desperately dispossessed and therefore poor, and the company's new private equity owners are once again promising that they will soon start adhering to the country's labor laws, that they will soon start paying minimum wages, and that they will soon provide functioning schools and medical clinics. And I didn't mean to laugh at that, but they haven't.
How the fuck?
They haven't done that.
They'll get right on it.
How the fuck do you get to do that? Like, you know what? We talk.
They haven't.
There's a lot of like,
haven't,
the Congolese government's really weak. Congolese government, this, that. Congolese government. How the fuck? The Congolese government still got a military. How the fuck do you like boldly go? Yeah, we'll start paying minimum wages whenever we fucking feel like. How do you get away with that?
Because if you take action against them, then
your government gets
landlord
cool.
is like, I'm gonna fix your leaky bathtub that's been leaking for 4 weeks and is making your water bill go up soon, and you put in like a maintenance request, and then your landlord like sends some guy over who doesn't fix faucets. He's like, I'm here for your gutters, and I'm like, I didn't ask for that. And then I have to
Yeah.
text my landlord again, and then he's like soon, and I'll deal with it soon. But like, why would he care? Like, he doesn't. I'm still giving him money.
Fair.
You
These
know?
people,
And I guess I could shoot my landlord with a gun, but there would probably be some consequences for me
Yeah.
if I did that.
only
And
to
so
get
I
caught.
think it's one of those kind of things. It's like it's a feudal relationship.
Yeah.
And I guess, like, speaking of feudal lords, these promises have obviously never been fulfilled, and the Congo is still being robbed of its wealth. And as recently as July 2022, a month after the current Belgian king, who is, his name is Philippe Leopold, okay, is his middle name. So, like, that, I think, tells you everything that you need to know.
Yeah.
Like, because King Leopold is his grandfather. So, they should have retired that name. It's like how no
Yeah.
one's got the name Adolf anymore,
Yeah.
except for people that were like born before World War II, because we've all kind of collectively decided that we need to put that name out to pasture. And I feel
Yeah.
like if your grandfather did the big genocide of the early 1900s, and then your father names you after him, like, or even if it's just like, I know it's a family name because like Europeans only have like 7 names that they go through, but you don't think like, oh, maybe we shouldn't do that. Like, they are unapologetic. And so yeah, he apologized, and then the DRC announced that it would begin auctioning off a vast majority of its oil and gas drilling blocks located in the country's rainforest and peatland. And the president's justification for this was that he wanted to get his population out of poverty. But the Congo can never even begin implementing protected land for guerrillas as long as their stolen land remains in the hands of colonizers. And as long as these colonizers control the material wealth of the Congo, the more willing they will become to sell off protected land to the highest bidder. And that is like exactly the relationship that Western capitalists want them to be trapped in. And
Yeah.
I would like to know, I know that King Philippe has like jewels. Like, I know he's got tons of jewels. I would like to know what those jewels are and how much they're worth, because I feel like if you're offering a fucking apology for the genocide that your grandfather that you're named after did, like, I'm looking at pictures of him, I'm seeing that he's wearing a lot of jewels. He needs to be selling those off.
Yeah.
This is a threat. You should be killing CEOs. Every one of you should be killing CEOs and royalty. Do you understand? Interlinked. Yummy ice cream. Interlinked.
Okay, you want to guess where King Philippe went to college? Or where he went to university? Sorry. I went to college, the Evergreen State College. It's not a university.
Yeah.
I don't know what the difference is, but it's probably because we weren't doing evil there. But you want to guess where he went to school? Maybe you already know.
I'm not sure,
I
actually.
don't know.
Would you like to guess?
Stanford.
Stanford is the correct answer.
Let's go.
It is
a
like,
school of evil.
I think that the ranking, like, at some point is going to be tipped in Stanford's favor. California is a newer state, so like Harvard has like a couple hundred years advantage on it in terms of like just general production of evil and useless people. But I think if we like adjusted for scale, like for time, then Stanford might come out ahead, because the past like couple decades, it's just like person after person that does either like incredibly dumb or incredibly evil, or both at Stanford University. I don't know. I think it's been like an undercurrent here, but the like obvious impact of capitalism is environmental destruction. And I think that when people say that capitalism is unsustainable, um, like, you don't like, it's not always clear what they mean, but it is this, where it's like we are accelerating the death of our planet. And it's actually probably not going to be the planet's death, because Earth is pretty hardy, but it might be like the end of quality living conditions for some species on here, including our own. And that is like the actual thing that people mean, hopefully, if they know what they're talking about when they say that capitalism is unsustainable, where it's like I can quote Margaret Thatcher here, actually, or like I can paraphrase her. The problem with capitalism is eventually you run out of other people's stuff. Like at some point, there's not going to be resources to extract, and we're like pretty quickly accelerating to that
rapidly
point.
approaching that. But folks, we also need to let's. I know we do a lot of we do a lot of climate dooming, everywhere. Everyone does it all the time.
Actually, I don't have
I'm not
a doom.
doomer. Yeah, we're not gonna die. Okay, let's just.
Oh, if you live in the United States, calm down.
You're good.
Is what
You're
I
good.
have to say.
Okay, yeah.
Like your job is actually to make things easier for other people.
Yeah, and then like let's just we're not gonna make the Earth uninhabitable. We might make a lot more of it like the Sahara or like the open steppes of Eurasia, but we're not completely fucked, people. Everybody needs to take a deep breath.
We're not fucked. And like I feel like the nihilism is almost like it comes across a lot of the time, especially from Westerners, like it's an excuse to not do things. Yeah. And especially when people are like, oh, we've already like hit like XYZ point of no return, and it's like, no, like that's not true. Things will get worse. They will likely get worse for people who are already in the places where their resources are being extracted from them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're in the United States and you're saying things like, we've only got 30 years to live, I feel like you need to open your eyes.
Touch grass. Literally, it's out there still. But
sometimes
like we will
people have
like
depression.
Roaches.
We'll live.
And
people are like cockroaches. Okay, we're the only thing on Earth other than like cockroaches that have been able to spread to and thrive in every single biome that this planet has. We'll make it.
We'll make
people
it.
People already live in the hottest, most unhospitable places on Earth. There are people who live in the middle of the Sahara Desert. They're doing okay, right? Things will get worse, but I like to believe that the overarching theme of human history has been towards good. So yes, it might get worse, but it will get better. It's just going to take a lot of rich people.
Unfortunately, the gorillas probably won't make it in this scenario, though. So I swear to God, if you let this happen, I am...
Yeah, I think there's like two prevailing like warring dumb opinions, and one is like that the earth is cooked and it's over for us and we should just I don't know what they want people to even be doing when they're like, yeah, we've only got 30 years left. Like, I don't know, then what? And then there's people, I suppose, who are like speaking with the vested interest of capitalists, where they're like, no, everything's going to be like totally fine. Like, it's a non-issue. And the truth is more like the Earth has been through a lot. It has been through like a lot of different kinds of climate changes. So there's no reason to believe that it would just go kaput through whatever the next one is going to be. But that change may result in really horrific living conditions for people that are already like not living in great conditions. And it is probably going to result in like the destruction of a lot of natural resources and habitats if people don't do something about it. And that's why I'd like to draw our attention back to King Philippe and the jewels that he has.
We should get his jewels.
He was born 1960.
They probably stole him from Africa anyway.
He is younger than my parents. Like, I think that is one of the crazy things to think about is like this, like, if you know anything about King Leopold and what Belgium was getting up to like not that long ago, it's so horrifically evil. It's just like hard to think about and understand. And that is like a guy who is like young enough to be like my parent, like my friend's parents. That's his grandfather. I know a lot of people have met their great grandparents. It is just not that long ago. And obviously like people today are still living through the consequences of it.
Yeah.
And this is why anytime a European gives you attitude for being an American, you can just point at a picture of the Belgian Congo and say, we didn't do that.
We did.
Yeah,
We didn't do
We
that.
did our own worst things, but we didn't do
I
that.
do get confused at Europeans like trying to be superior to Americans over social issues. Like one time I did have a white European person try to tell me that like wow, it must be so scary in America with police brutality, like you must be glad that it's not like that in Europe. And it's like who do you think made the race?
Who do you
like,
think made
what do
the
you
America, folks?
how did the cops even get there? What are we talking about? It's just I don't know. Europeans are too much. But I think this is also like why the conversation around reparations, which is not just about like American reparations, but reparations for colonialism, is really relevant and important because I would imagine that for people in places like the Congo, that like reparations would partly take the form of like having some sovereignty over their environment, the same way that like indigenous people here are asking for that. And that is like it's not just an important thing in terms of like anti-racism, it is really important for sustaining environmental health. And that's why like any good communist knows how to think about several things at the same time.
Yeah.
A lot of
think
people are bad
dialectically.
at it. Yeah.
So yeah, I guess this brings me into like the overarching point I wanted to make with this episode of it's possible to build a green energy future. It's possible to save the gorillas. It's possible to save the chimpanzees. It's possible to do all of these things. It's not possible to do them while
If you just vote for Democrats.
no, yeah.
Yeah, and don't fucking donate to the Sierra Club or any of that shit either. Do not do that.
There's no sustainable future where we have green energy, environment is saved, that the Congo is not also one of the richest nations in the world.
Yeah.
If people were like truly granted sovereignty over their own resources, then we would be paying an arm and a leg for it. But that's not a bad thing.
As we should.
As we should. Yeah.
Yeah, the Congo, you ever see that picture, folks, of, the world without something and then it's flying cars? That's literally what the Congo would be like if they just simply had sovereignty over their own natural resources.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like I think it comes back to the dumbwaiter thing also, where like a lot of the convenience that we've gotten used to it just comes through this like accelerated extraction of resources. And I mean, like 10 years ago, it used to take a couple of minutes to download a video, and now it takes like nothing. And we've just like gotten used to a lot of like convenience and ease that comes at the expense in a lot of aspects of our lives, like through this immense like exploitation. And if people were able to have sovereignty over their own land and were able to like treat it with care and respect, we probably wouldn't have that kind of convenience. But we've only gotten used to it because like we're just not seeing we're involved in that exploitation, and so it's like not something that people have to think about day to day, which is why I feel like rather than donating your money to like I don't know who else, or people that are like building hospitals in Africa. That's another one that people love to do. That's a tax write-off. Or like buying something that like gives someone in Africa like a shirt. That's also a tax write-off. It doesn't do shit. Like a better use of your time would be like organizing where you are and like trying to have some kind of impact, maybe through direct action of some kind, over whether or not people can be in those places and extract those resources.
I guess we can end this episode off with a quote from Thomas Sankara, who is a very similar situation to Patrice Lumumba.
My favorite guy ever.
It's very sad.
Those who come with wheat, millet, corn, or milk, they are not helping us. Those who really want to help us can give us plows, tractors, fertilizer, insecticide, watering cans, drills, and dams. That is how we would define food aid.
Burkina Faso, the only food surplus nation in sub-Saharan Africa before they killed them.
Yeah.
Thinking about Sankara makes me so sad.
It makes me so fucking mad.
The Congo is a very good example of what we wanted to cover in this series, but it's also applicable to just about every other sub-Saharan African nation that you can think of. we did the same thing multiple times. It was France that time, Belgium in the Congo, but we were mostly, the United States was also mostly involved in those. We had our
Huh.
fingers in the pie, so to speak.
Do you have any recommended readings? Maybe that could be a
Ooh.
thing. If you want to learn more about this.
Hold on a second.
I actually also have, if I can go find the name of it.
All right, folks. So I'm going to want everybody to read the Thomas Sankara biography. It's edited by Amber Murray. Read this. It's called A Certain Amount of Madness, The Life, Politics, and Legacies of Thomas Sankara. Great book. Also, Thomas Sankara Speaks. This is a book. It's just filled with his speeches. It's basically every speech the man ever gave, translated into English for you. Oh, and then we've got, who wrote this book? Well, this is called Agrarian Socialism in America by somebody Bissett. Have you ever read this book?
What
I
is
stole
it
this
called?
from the UNCC library. It's called
The,
Agrarian Socialism in America.
Oh, no, I have not.
It's a great book. Let me see who wrote it real quick. Oh, Jim Bissett. Anyway, this book, Agrarian Socialism in America, is about the rise and fall of the Socialist Party in Oklahoma in the 1920s. It's a great book if you want to learn about how you can do socialism and still be in America. There you go. That's my reading.
I have one recommendation, which is like adjacent to the topic. It's called The American Crucible, Slavery, Emancipation, and Human Rights by Robin Blackburn. And it is about the institution of chattel slavery in the Americas and kind of like distinguishing what made it different from other forms of slavery that have occurred throughout history. And I think also like really like makes a good connection between the industrialization of agrarian societies and the acceleration of slavery that I think can relate to some of the other things that we've talked about. And if you listen to Big Soy Naturals and you get in on the Peanut Chamber Discord, then you can join my library where I will give you a copy of this book for allegedly free.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Well, yeah, so that was episode 3 of the Congo. It was definitely a lot more discussion focused, but that's not a bad thing. It would be a lot more boring if we just talked about the statistics.
Don't rate the episode.
Sorry, I don't know what I'm doing.
The episode was good.
Ignore that. Yeah,
It
I
was
was
really
just gonna say it would be really boring to just talk about like the statistics of like oil exports. So we did it different.
You should summarize every episode when you're done and say what you think of it. Can I close out on because I kind of quoted Margaret Thatcher, and I have a little Ronald Reagan quote
please.
that I want to share with the two of you. That if you have a reaction to it, you can share it, but we could also just end it on that. Let the listeners think what they will. So Ronald Reagan, former president of the United States, friend of primates, maybe, once said that the best place for the inside of a man, the greatest place for the inside of a man is the outside of a horse.
My favorite Reagan quote is, "Help me, I'm being strangled by a chimpanzee." Thank you all for listening.
Goodbye.
Bye.